Welcome back to Philosophy and Ethics in Games, the series where I break down the stories in some of our favorite games and ask the tough questions to figure out what is right and what is wrong. I'm Josh, Bearheart Hawk, and today we're getting back into the wasteland of Fallout 4 as we discover just how much of the world has changed in 2 centuries. In case you missed any of the previous episodes in the Philosophy and Ethics series, I've linked a playlist in the description below. As I continue to break down this and other games, I'll add new videos to the playlist so you can find them all in one place. Emerging from the vault at the end of episode 1, we discovered our hero, Josh Bearheart, has been on ice for about 210 years. At some point during that hiatus, someone broke into the vault, killing his wife and stealing his son. And now that he's out, he's searching for answers. Thankfully, his trusty Mr. Handy, Codsworth, not only survived the nuclear blast that destroyed just about everything else in the neighborhood, but also managed to keep the house in decent shape over that long, lonely stretch of time. Though he is a little worse for wear, as he seems just a tad delusional when he's confronted with the events of the vault.
Oh, sir, it's been just horrible. 2 centuries with no one to talk to, no one to serve. I spent the first 10 years trying to keep the floors waxed, but nothing gets out nuclear fallout from vinyl wood.
After a brief search around the neighborhood for signs of Sean, Codsworth points us in the direction of nearby Concord, where he knows some groups have held up in the past. It's a long shot, but it's all we have, and our top priority is finding Sean. Nothing can get in the way of that mission. On the way to town, we pass by an abandoned Red Rocket gas station and meet our first friend in the form of a canine companion named Dogmeat. As Dogmeat is not only a good boy, but also the best dog in the Commonwealth, we'll allow him to accompany us for now, though he deserves some treats and a belly rub when we get back to Sanctuary later. Finally arriving in Concord, we come across a couple groups locked in a massive gunfight, and we have to decide whether getting involved is even worth our time. So let's jump into the shoes of someone who's just woken up from a 200-year nap to find themselves in a world with no laws, no established government, and no way to know who's the good guys and who's the bad guys. In the game, it's pretty easy to see, as pointing our weapon at a person tells us if they're a raider, a traitor, some other role, or a named NPC. But that wouldn't be the case in a real-world situation. A good rule of thumb might be to just shoot back if someone shoots at you first, but that can get messy if they wind up hitting you on that first shot. And that raises a bit of a conundrum, as they might only be firing at you because they think that you've got bad intentions, meaning that neither of you is really looking to kill, but rather just wants to defend yourself against a perceived threat. This situation isn't exclusive to the wastelands of a video game either, as there are plenty of ways that you could wind up unsure of who to trust. Maybe your car breaks down in a bad area, and you don't know if the person stopping their car nearby is coming to help or do harm. Perhaps you're the adventurous type and find yourself in an abandoned building like so many urban exploration YouTubers do, finding the place isn't as empty as you thought when you spot a person walking through a room. Or maybe, like me, you found yourself at one point or another in the middle of a war zone, where the enemy combatants weren't wearing uniforms, choosing instead to dress themselves in the clothes of innocent civilians. I was in Iraq in 2011, and one of the biggest issues we had was deciphering who was actually just an average person trying to live their lives and feed their families, and who was hiding a weapon, ready to strike when we let our guard down. It isn't always easy to figure out who you can trust in those situations, but one thing you can start with is open communication, making your intentions known and respecting boundaries. If both people in a tense situation choose to announce what they want right away, it makes it a little easier to calm things down. That doesn't mean you should trust without warrant, but it does mean that you need to give a little leeway to strangers who are willing to talk. Most people just want safety and security, They aren't out to harm anyone else, they just want to make it through to the next day. Sure, there's always a risk they could do harm, but statistically, you're more likely to be harmed by someone you know than a stranger. For instance, data from the FBI in 2017 showed that in murder cases where the perpetrator was known, only 19.4% of the victims were killed by a stranger. That number excludes cases where the assailant was unknown, so the total could be higher or lower, but it actually makes a lot of sense. When you spend a lot of time around someone, growing to trust them through interactions, you let your guard down. While that's not inherently a bad thing, as humans need to be able to trust each other to cooperate in a social group, it also raises the risk of becoming a victim of an assault or murder or some other crime because you don't expect those closest to you to hurt you. If a stranger comes at you with a knife or points a gun in your direction, you're going to react quick because your brain is in defensive mode. If a loved one does it, you're likely to react a little slower because you're more relaxed around them to begin with. Logically, it would make sense to be on your guard at all times, with everyone that you know. Though that doesn't really make a lot of sense socially, and it would be way too emotionally and psychologically draining to keep up. Even so, there are some people out there who know what that is like firsthand, because they've been hurt by someone they trusted and live in fear of being hurt again. It's important to acknowledge that fact in these kind of conversations because it's something I think most people forget or don't realize when it comes to interacting with strangers out in the world, and it's something that complicates this whole matter further. Most of us are distrustful of strangers because, going all the way back to the early days of humanity, strangers were a threat to our group and whatever resources we held. But people who have been hurt by friends or family members, trusted people that were a part of the group, wind up taking this distrust even further because of experience. They don't just think the stranger could be a threat, they know it. Getting back into the Wasteland, this is something we'll see a lot of as the groups of raiders that wander the world regularly terrorize people, killing them and stealing supplies left and right. Because of this, many people are hesitant to trust anyone outside of their group, no matter how friendly that person may seem. We can see an example of the worst of this at a place called Hardware Town in Boston proper, where the cries for help from a woman just labeled as settler urge us to come inside and help her injured friend. As we go in, we find out the whole thing was nothing more than a ruse meant to take advantage of travelers' sympathy, and we wind up teaching the raiders a lesson by showing them that sympathy and empathy don't equal weakness. That moment is just a few steps ahead of where we are, though, as we deal with the raiders outside of the Museum of Freedom in Concord and head inside to clear out the rest of the rats. The whole adventure might be nothing more than a fool's errand, but our help was requested by a man with a cool hat, and I just can't turn down that awesome look. Getting through the rabble, we find a small group of survivors holed up in the top floor of the museum in an office. And after getting to know them a little bit, we agree to finish off the raiders outside using a suit of power armor and a minigun that's just been chilling out on the roof of the building for God knows how long. Making ourselves into a human tank, we roll down the main street of Concord, looking and feeling pretty badass as we mow down raiders. That feeling only lasts a little while, though, as we soon discover the true threat in the area as an enormous monster bursts forth from the street and starts killing everything that moves. This is a Deathclaw, and while they are a massive threat to the mere mortals that call the Wasteland home, our hero Josh is immune to their teeth and claws, and he makes quick work of the beast before heading back to regroup with Preston Garvey and the rest of the group known as the Minutemen. And this group is based on a real-world militia, dating back all the way to the 17th century in the colony of Massachusetts. Back then, all men between the ages of 16 and 60 were required to be a part of local militias in their town of residence, and some of the men in those groups were further tasked with being prepared to defend the town or even the colony at a minute's notice. These were called the Minutemen, and they helped keep the cities and towns they lived in safe during the French and Indian War before becoming a pivotal force in New England during the early Revolutionary War. But they suffered from a lack of leadership and wound up dissolving in the long run, which isn't too different from this ragtag group that we find here in Fallout. The Minutemen in the game used to be a formidable force, but the entirety of what's left of them stands before us in this small museum in Concord. There was apparently a situation at some point in the past in a place called Quincy, where the Minutemen failed to show up and defend a settlement, and ever since the group has been falling apart and dying off. As important as history is, we'll brush this part of things off for now because I want to really focus on how the group moves forward. Leaving the museum, we follow Preston and the rest of the gang back to Sanctuary Hills to establish our first base of operations. This action also starts a series of missions and events that often get a lot of flack from players because they can be really repetitive and don't seem to really add up to much in the end. I'm speaking, of course, of the settlement system and expansion of the Minutemen as a whole. From here on out, Preston will give the player a series of missions, mainly focused on either clearing out and establishing a new settlement or assisting a settlement that's being actively attacked. Ultimately, this line leads us to establishing a settlement in the former home base of the Minutemen, known as the Castle. But let's dive a bit into why these settlements are so important and try to give them a little more meaning. Being set in Boston, the game has a lot of Revolutionary War symbolism, and the theme of freedom is heavy. Unlike the war against the Crown, however, this is a war focused on freedom from raiders, beasts of the Wasteland, the harsh environment, and other threats to life in the world after the bombs dropped. The player, fresh out of the vault, is tasked with establishing that freedom as he or she is given the title of General of the Minutemen. And in the long run, that title can actually mean a lot as we make our way around the world, creating new settlements and filling them with survivors. See, people have lost hope in the centuries since the Great War of ever seeing any kind of real improvement in their way of life. Many of them have become very isolationist, mainly due to the lack of trust in outsiders that we discussed earlier. And while they might have their own little farms, they try to keep to themselves and don't really want to associate with anyone else. While having your own little settlement, comprised of just you and one or two other people, is possible, it also leaves you vulnerable in a world like the one we found in Fallout. Raiders are a common problem, but there's also super mutants and various monsters and pests that could wind up destroying everything you have without breaking a sweat. If you want to survive long term, you need more people. Having friendly groups nearby that can help when things get bad would be a massive boost overall to the stability of life in the Commonwealth. But they are also there to help the general in a pinch. Each settlement can be equipped with an artillery cannon, which may just be my favorite thing ever, as I was in the field artillery when I served in the army, and I'm partial to the King of Battle because of that. Nearby settlements will also send in reinforcements when you need some help clearing out enemies, and they'll allow for a quick stop to resupply and drop off excess junk when you need to clear out your inventory. Those benefits don't come without a bit of work though, which is true both in the game and in real life. Not only do you have to do the physical work to build the settlements up, you also need to maintain relationships and get to know the people at the settlements a little bit. This doesn't mean that you need to sit down and talk to everyone or stop by each settlement every day to say hi, but it does mean that you need to be there when they need help, just like you expect them to be there for you. But even in the darkness of the Wasteland, there is a ray of hope outside of the Minutemen. A great, green, shining jewel that just might hold the secret to building a better future for everyone, while also giving us a new lead in the search for Sean. Diamond City. Built in the ruins of what was once a baseball stadium, Diamond City is about as close to pre-war as we're going to get in the Commonwealth outside of the vaults. There's political intrigue, conspiracies, and a glimpse of our own world hiding in the shadows of home plate. As we first approach the highly secured city, we meet what might be one of my favorite characters in the game in the form of a rowdy woman named Piper. She's apparently been banned from coming back inside as she argues with someone to open the gate, though the full argument is interrupted as we're attacked by some wild dogs. The gate opens up as we're fighting, and we're able to mosey in without any problems once the threat has been dealt with. Following Piper, we quickly find out why she was locked out as we are greeted by the mayor of Diamond City, an angry-looking man who's had it up to here with the nosy reporter. And it's honestly good to see that even more than 200 years after the fall of society, there is still a love-hate relationship between politicians and the press. Just looking at America, even though the First Amendment to the Constitution guarantees freedom of the press, there has been a long history of politicians trying to silence stories they didn't like in the media. Going back to the very beginning of the nation, the Sedition Act criminalized publishing, quote, false, scandalous, and malicious writing against the government. The Adams administration used this act to close down several newspapers while also successfully prosecuting 10 individuals, while many others saw fit to self-censor for fear of retribution. The Red Scare of the 1950s is another time where we can see the American government coming for those who espoused viewpoints they didn't agree with Senator Joseph McCarthy publicly attacking journalists who asked too many questions. Richard Nixon, the 37th president, famously had an enemies list that consisted of several journalists he wanted taken down for their coverage of his presidency, and we've even seen a push in recent months by the current administration in the White House to have journalists and reporters banned or fired for their perceived slights. Now, that isn't to say that all journalists are trustworthy, or that some of them didn't deserve pushback for twisting the words of a political figure or even making up stories entirely. But as a general rule, freedom tends to work best when people are more informed of the things going on in the world around them. Journalists should be free to ask questions without fear of retribution, and they should be able to dig into stories without worrying about being locked away for uncovering the wrong thing. At the same time, the outlets publishing those stories have a duty to ensure that they are only sharing the facts that align with reality, and to ensure that they are working to inform rather than instruct the reader. The average person should be able to read the information and make up their own mind, and they should be able to trust that the outlet they are reading from is honest. This is true for more modern forms of media as well, with both radio and television networks having the same obligation, and it's up to us, the average person reading, viewing, or listening to the news, to hold the outlets we get our information from to a high standard and call them out when they share inaccurate information. Jumping back into the game, the argument between Piper and Mayor McDonough seems to revolve around missing persons within the city, and the apparent fact that the city security team doesn't seem interested in helping to find those who've gone missing. This, and a chat with Piper's sister Nat as we walk into the city, brings us a couple of new things to focus on. First, we get the name of a detective known as Nick Valentine, who the mayor says could be helpful in our search for Sean. This is the best lead we've had thus far, and we'll make our way to his office momentarily. But before that, we are introduced to the Institute. According to Nat, they snatch people up in the middle of the night and no one hears from them ever again. It almost sounds like nothing more than a ghost story on the surface. But as we walk through the city, we can get hints that there may be more to this boogeyman from people like Kathy, who's talking about how she thinks the mayor's secretary is one of those things, and from one of the shop owners, Myrna, who advertises synth-free shopping. Clearly, these people are worried about some kind of threat, though it isn't clear immediately whether that threat is real or if it's tied to something Piper wrote. A walk deeper into the city, however, starts to shed some light on what's going on, as we can find Mayor McDonough giving a speech where he reassures the residents of the city that he is not a synth. From that, we can kind of piece together that people are not only worried about being kidnapped, but also about having their friends and neighbors replaced by the Institute. And that ties directly back into the trust thread that we started the episode on. Not only are people hesitant to trust outsiders because of the raiders and the kinds of tricks they pull to lure in victims, but they also might need to worry that the people they're closest to aren't who they think they are. I'm obviously kind of beating around the bush here to play up the drama of the story, But we later discovered that the Institute is able to make synthetic humans that look and sound just like anyone in the Commonwealth, and that they are actually replacing people. Now, there are a lot of wild theories that exist in our world today about people being replaced by everything from aliens to interdimensional beings. And while none of those conspiracies actually hold any truth, they aren't completely unwarranted. Sci-fi movies like Invasion of the Body Snatchers from 1978 filled the public consciousness with the idea that friends or neighbors could be replaced without anyone being the wiser. But the concept likely goes back a lot further. In 1970, Japanese robotics professor Masahiro Mori coined the term uncanny valley to describe an odd feeling people would get when interacting with objects that were human-like in appearance. Up to a certain point, people didn't really have a problem. But when an artificial object like a robot, android, or CGI face is too perfect, too human-like, we tend to feel revulsion towards it. There are a couple of theories about what causes this, with both taking us back to prehistoric times when Homo sapiens weren't the only game in town. About 50,000 years ago, Homo sapiens shared the world with other hominid groups, like Neanderthals, Denisovans, and other similar species. One theory about the origin of the uncanny valley focuses on the strife and competition that likely existed between these groups. If you were in a group of fellow Homo sapiens, a Neanderthal, for instance, might have been a threat. They would have looked a lot like you, but with subtle differences that would allow them to be spotted and dealt with before they could do any harm. This uncanny valley feeling could be a direct genetic quirk that stuck with us even after the other hominids died out. It's also thought that it could be related to some kind of pathogen avoidance, with subtle differences in facial features distinguishing members of the group that had some kind of disease or deformity. The feeling of unease could have been a warning sign to stay away from those individuals that had something wrong with them to prevent the spread of a contagion that could be deadly. But while the reasons for the uncanny valley feeling are up for debate, the feeling itself could help to explain both the conspiracies around people being replaced in the real world and the panic among communities in Fallout about synths. If our brains are hardwired to spot small discrepancies in faces, providing a signal in the form of an uneasy feeling when we spot them, it's possible the same system could malfunction, causing us to doubt whether the person that we're looking at is actually who we think they are. Even if it's a familiar face, one we've seen 1,000 times, a misfiring of the neurons responsible for the uncanny valley feeling could make us uneasy and lead to questions about the person we thought we knew. When you exacerbate that by including a conspiracy about people being abducted and replaced by aliens or interdimensional beings or a secret agency like the Institute, it could be a recipe for widespread panic. If that feeling can be easily triggered by looking at a CGI or android face, who's to say it can't be triggered just by thinking that the face we're looking at is an android? And we don't have to wait long to find out how this paranoia affects people in the Commonwealth, as we find a group gathered in the middle of Diamond City, watching a man named Kyle interrogating someone he thinks is a synth in the form of his brother Riley. Kyle has a gun trained on the suspected synth, but Diamond City security is staffed by former members of the Detroit PD, and those guys don't mess around. Overzealous security aside, if people are questioning whether their own family members have been replaced by synths, with no way to know the difference, what hope do we have in the long run? Thinking back to our discussion about the rebuilding of the Commonwealth through settlements and the Minutemen, while those things can help people gain trust through strength when it comes to outsiders, they can't help when the threat is hidden within the group. If anyone could be a synth, being replaced at any time by this mysterious, impossible-to-locate force known as the Institute, and if we have no way of telling that they're a synth without killing them, there's no way to really establish a safe community. We have to be able to trust our neighbors, friends, and family members, and at the moment, that is impossible. But if we ever want to dig further into who the Institute is, and what their ties to Sean's kidnapping could be, we're going to need some help. Heading over to Nick Valentine's office, we find his secretary, Ellie, in a rather down state, as her boss has gone missing himself. It's probably not a great sign that the person we need to help us find our missing son has disappeared, but Ellie is able to give us some direction to help locate him, and we set off into the next episode to pull another thread on this mystery. Next week, we'll be deciding how to deal with an old-school gangster while also tracking down the mercenary that took Sean and learning more about the Institute along the way. Make sure you don't miss out on that video by liking this video and subscribing to Lost in Games on YouTube. You can help me continue making these breakdowns by joining as a channel member on YouTube or by signing up as a patron on Patreon. Members and patrons help me to purchase new games to cover and help me get more storage space for video captures, while also getting cool perks like early access and their name on the screen in videos. That's all I've got for this one. I want to thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.